Mounce chapter 18 is all about the present, middle, and passive indicative tense. So just to remind ourselves, when we say present, we mean that the time frame that's in view is the time frame of the utterance, and the verb is happening at the same time that the utterance happens. So if I say, I am going to the store, going to the store is happening when? Well, contemporaneous with my saying it, right? I am teaching Greek. I'm teaching Greek, right? That's the verbal action in it, and it's true at the time that I say it. You might remember me later saying I'm teaching Greek, but I'm not going to be teaching Greek later, am I? But it was contemporaneous with when I said it. So the reference time for present tense verbs are the time of utterance. Middle and passive have to do with something called voice. What is the voice that we've learned so far? Active voice. That's right. And so let's remind ourselves what we mean by voice here. Active voice has to do with the subject doing what, or how is the subject related to the verbal action. Active means the subject performs the action, right? Example, I wash the cat. Poor cat. Cats don't really like to be washed, do they? Subject performs the action. The passive voice. Well, yes, and passive, the subject. Exactly. Subject is acted upon, right? And so, my example here is, the cat is washed. All right. These are concepts that we can grasp fairly readily because we have grammatical forms in English that actually reflect the reality of voice. What's very difficult with the Greek language is that there is this voice called middle voice, and it stands between active and passive, and English doesn't have a grammatical form for it. And because of that, we really wrestle and struggle with it. What would be an example in English of the semantics of middle voice? It would be something like this. I could say something like, I bathed. Okay. And what's the idea there? So the subject does the action, or does the verb, and is affected by it too, in some way. So I bathed. Am I actively washing? Yes, but I'm not washing something external to me, am I? Right. I'm actually washing my body. So when I say I bathed, then that's the at least the semantics of middle compared to I washed the cat and the cat is washed. Okay, so sometimes you could see middle voice verbs doing things like I washed my hands. So there, I've got a verb that's active in the sense that the subject's performing it, but the thing I'm acting upon is part of my body, right? I washed my hands. And Greek could use the middle voice for that idea. Okay, and hands would be in the accusative case. So reflexive ideas can be encompassed by the middle. Greek can also use an active verb with reflexive accusative pronouns to do that also. Okay, so yeah, there's a couple ways to skin this cat we're washing. Yes.
I think I made a mistake. Last semester I wrote here that passive means the speaker receives the verb. That's not correct. It's the subject.
Yeah, it's the subject. Right. Yeah, because the speaker could say the cat is washed, right? And the speaker is not washed. It's the cat. Exactly. Yeah. All right. So, and you know what? I may have used S when I was jotting things down like this, and you might have saw the S and wrote speaker, or I might have misspoken. So that's always a possibility. Okay, so that's the active, middle, passive idea. So, think of middle as being between the active and passive voice as it relates to the subject's relationship to the verbal activity. Okay? Now, let's go back over here. Indicative is the mood of the verb tense. So present, middle, passive, indicative. And indicative is the mood that's used for making assertions. And also for asking questions, but you can ask questions using like some other moods as well. But in English, at least, when we think of indicative, we're thinking of making assertions and then asking questions. Okay, so just to compare that with the imperative, right? Imperative. If I say eat more chicken, that's not a statement of fact; it's a command to do something, right? But if I say Billy eats more chicken, then that's an assertion. That's something that he does. And that's indicative mood. Some people like to call it the mood of reality or truth. But even a liar can use the indicative mood when he's lying, right? Yes. Okay. It's not always true. So let's talk about how the present, middle, passive, indicative tense is formed. As you know, all tenses are composed of tense stems, and the tense stem that we learn with the present active indicative from chapter 16 and the contract verbs in the present active indicative from chapter 17, these are going to use the present stem, right? So for our paradigm verb luo, the present stem of luo is lu. We have connecting vowels then that will have to be added to the present stem. And our two connecting vowels are our good old friends, omicron and epsilon. Now, can you remember when you use the omicron connecting vowel? When the personal ending begins with a mu or nu. That's right. Terrific. And then over here, I have the real endings. And these are the endings that are the primary, middle, passive endings. Let's take a look at the personal endings master chart I gave you. Okay, so on this master personal ending chart, what you have are 4 boxes. We have laid this out. This is basically representing Mounce's material here from the textbook. The primary tenses are here on the left side, on the top and bottom. Secondary tenses are on the right side, top and bottom. What's the difference between a primary and a secondary tense? Do we ever talk about this? I'm trying to remember if we ever did. Yes, that's right. The secondary tenses are past time tenses, and they will be characterized in Greek by something called an augment. Okay? We don't need to worry about that right now, but the secondary tenses are augmented and past. So if it's not augmented and past, then it belongs in the primary tenses. The present tense is not past, so it is a primary tense. Now, the other layout, in terms of how you can look at this, is in terms of voice. So if you look at the top row, the active voice is the top 2. So I can have primary tenses that are active, and I can have secondary tenses that are active. The middle passive personal endings are on the bottom row. Okay, the primary ones and the secondary ones over here on the right side. So what we are focusing on in the early chapters of verbs are these first 2 on the left. And if you remember, I asked you to memorize the real personal endings me, si, ti, men, te, and nti. Right? And we want to see that what we have here for the middle passive endings are my, si, tai, methus, they, nti. Now, what do you see as being very similar here? Yeah, well, we got mu, sigma, tau, and iotas, right? Here I have mu, sigma, tau, and iotas, but what are we what's sandwiched in between those? An alpha, right? Me, my, si, si, ti, tai. And the last one, T over here and tie over there, right? Okay, so there is a difference here between the first person and the second person forms. Men and te. Here we get metha and sthe. Sort of similar, not quite, right? So this will be rather new compared to these other endings you have. But I just want you to see that there is a kind of pattern here that Greek is using when we get to these personal endings, okay? So let's go back. Okay, so we have these real endings, mai-sai tai, metha, sthe, and ntai. And here's the good news. With the present active indicative, some of these real endings get obscured, either by not being used, as in the me ending, right? The me ending just doesn't get used, and the omicron connecting vowel lengthens to an omega. And that's how we get luo. Some of the other endings change their form. And so we had a lot of modifications there. With the middle passive endings, most of those real endings show up once we add them. So they don't change a whole lot. The one that gets obscured is the second person singular. So we'll talk about that here in just a second. So let's look at what happens when we add all the forms parts together. So first person singular is lu. Mai is my personal ending for the first singular, so I have to use the omicron connecting vowel, lu-a-mai. Lu-a-mai. Say that with me, lu-a-mai. Now, if we're going to translate this as the passive, and here's the deal, middle and passive forms are identical in Greek in the present. You can't tell the difference between a present middle indicative and a present passive indicative. They use the same ending. All right? I'll talk to you in just a moment about how to translate these because of that problem. But for now, we're going to use the passive translation. So I am loosed is one way to translate that. I am being loosed would be another way. Okay? So everybody, lu-a-mai. Look at the next one. Second person singular ending is sai. That's not a mu or nu starting that personal ending, so I'm going to use the epsilon connecting vowel, right? Lu-a-sai. Now, here's what happens next. This sigma is now in between two vowels. And intervocalic sigma likes to drop out. And when it does, it falls into Hades, Sheol, or whatever other bad place you might imagine. And we're left with lu-a-I instead of lu-a-sai. What's going to happen here? Based on what we learned about contract verbs last chapter, we see that the epsilon and the alpha are going to interact and undergo contraction. This was the who got there first rule. Do you remember that? When I have an epsilon followed by an alpha, it changes to the long version of the epsilon, which is an eta. When the alpha meets an epsilon, the alpha gets there first, so this becomes the long version of an alpha, which is an alpha. Okay, in other words, the short alpha and the long alpha look the same, but this is long as a result of contraction. The long epsilon and the short epsilon don't look the same because a long epsilon is not an epsilon, it's an eta, right? So, anyhow, so I get, since the epsilon is here before the alpha, epsilon lengthens to eta, and then what happens to the iota that's hanging out after? It will subscript, okay? Remember, where do iotas subscript? They subscript under long vowels, and eta is most definitely long. So lu-a-sai is going to end up looking like lu-a, and that doesn't look very passive at all, does it? So this is one you really have to commit to your memory here. Okay, so lu-a, everybody, lu-a. So you are loosed. Next, lu-a-tai, everybody, lu-a-tai. Nothing weird happens here. No changes are necessary. He, she, it is loosed. Everyone, lu-amitha. Notice my omicron before the mu. That's groovy, isn't it? We knew that was coming. We are loosed. Lu-este. Epsilon before the non-mu or nu. That's y'all are loosed. And everybody, lu-on-tai. Tai starts with a nu. Gets the omicron connecting vowel. They are loosed. Okay? So let's compare those active versus the middle passive endings in the primary boxes. Me, CT are in the blue. My, sci, tie. The me parts, C parts, and T parts are blue here for you. I've put the red in to indicate where there's a difference. Methus, they, quite different than men and te. And then nt becomes ntai. There's that alpha. So you should, since we're going to be memorizing those quadrants in the personal endings master chart, you should memorize these endings here, okay, and the form of luo. So again, let's read these one more time. Luamai, lue, luatai, luamatha, luaste, luantai. All right, so those are your middle passive forms. Let me address the question of how you translate a verb that you come across in the present tense that is middle passive. Because remember, semantically, there is a difference between a verb's middle meaning and a verb's passive meaning. Okay? So how would you know, let's say you don't have a whole sentence, you're given a verb to parse and translate in Mounce's homework or say on a quiz that Dr. Marshall gives you, right? How do you know how to translate it if it could be middle or passive? Here's what I'm going to recommend you do, okay? First thing you have to think about is this. You have to ask yourself, can this verb, if it could be middle or passive, can it have a genuinely passive meaning? What do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is this. Let's take a verb like to die, and let's compare it to a verb like to kill. All right? I could say something like John kills Billy. Okay? That would be what voice in Greek? Active. Good. All right, and then I could say Billy is killed. What voice would that be? That would be passive. Excellent. Now, if I had this verb in Greek, I don't think you know the verb to kill, do you? I don't think you've learned that. It's apokteno, okay? I kill. You guys seen that before? Apokteno? Maybe? Kurt's seen it. He's nodding. So that's the active I kill, right? So if I wanted to say John kills, it would be John apoktain what? You remember your third singular ending? Apoktain ne, right? Apoktene. John kills Billy. Then if I wanted to say Billy is killed, Billy apok what? Tainatai. That's right. Apok tainatai. Okay? So you see that tie ending. That is a middle passive ending, right? Does this verb, is it susceptible to having a genuinely passive nuance? The answer is yes. The subject can be acted upon with this verb's meaning, right? Billy is killed. All right. Let's take the verb to die, though. I could say John dies. And that would make perfectly good sense. That would be what voice in Greek? Active, right? Isn't John the one who undergoes the dying? Yep. So John dies. That would be active. Can I convert that to a passive voice verb in English? Could I say John was died or John is died? No. All right. Some verbs cannot be made passive. And the question is, why not? So what do you think? When can a verb not be made passive? Well, you're trying to get at something that I know what it is.
Whenever you talk about different types of verbs,
Yes.
the verb itself, I don't know.
It has to do with this concept called transitivity. Yes. You remember the concept of transitivity. The verb to kill is a transitive verb. The verb to die is intransitive. Okay? What's that mean? A transitive verb is one that can take a direct object. A transitive verb takes a direct object. To kill. If I said to you, Bertha killed, you have an inherent need to know who or what she killed, right? You feel like that verb is incomplete without a direct object. Bertha killed what? Bertha killed her cat. All right? But if I said Bertha died, you might want to know why, but you don't want to know what. Right? Because to die is intransitive. It doesn't require a direct object. You see? And here's the deal. Only verbs that are transitive when they're active, only transitive verbs can be made passive in meaning. Because in passive verbs, the direct object of the verb when it's active becomes the subject of the passive verb, right? So in the active form, I have to have a direct object that can be the subject of a passive verb. Now, keeping all that in mind then, when you come to a verb that has a middle passive ending in Greek, you have to ask yourself, what does this verb mean when it's in the active voice? If it is transitive when it's active, then let's translate the middle passive form as if it were a true passive, and we'll give it a passive meaning. All right? And if the active voice doesn't, when you look at the active form and it's not transitive, then treat it, if it's got a middle passive ending, treat it like it's middle. Okay? Because you can't translate it as a passive verb if it wouldn't have been transitive in its active form. Okay? So that's how I'm going to ask you to do this. All right. Now, let's take a look at, let's see, 18.10.